Cool. All right. Hey, folks. We are live. My name is Nick Taylor. I'm a senior software engineer here at Forem. Forem is the software that powers dev. You can find me at iamdeveloper.com. I am also at Nikki T online everywhere. And feel free to give me a follow on Dev, Twitter, and Twitch, or whatever you fancy. I'm just going to paste those links into the chat, and then we'll get to our guest in a second. And for some reason, I cannot paste in the chat. Let's refresh it and see. Okay, I cannot type in my own chat, but it's interesting. Okay. All right, so that could be problematic, but I will paste all the links later. Um, while I introduce our guest, I'm going to look into the chat issue. Yeah, so here today, I'm with Bekah. I've actually never said your whole name, so I might be mispronouncing it. I apologize. I'm going to say it's probably Bekah Hawrot Weigel.
That is really good. You did a good job.
Okay, okay. So Becca's my co-host today. Christina, our open source community manager, had a small emergency, so she wasn't unavailable. And I know Becca from a virtual coffee group I attend, and she's super awesome. And she so graciously agreed to come on at last minute to help me co-host. So Becca, if you just want to talk a bit about yourself a bit.
Sure. Thanks. And thanks for having me. This is really exciting. I am Bekah, like he said. I am a career changer. So I went to a boot camp a couple of years ago, and I've been doing front end development for about the last year and a half. And I run a little group, co-run a group called Virtual Coffee, where we all kind of hang out and talk about developer things and so I think that's mostly about me.
Cool. I'm just gonna paste a few links in about Becca in the chat. I'm not really hacking the matrix here, but I was able to go to the web page of Twitch and just paste in the chat. So I'm just doing that. So here's some links from about Becca. You can check all that out. Give us both a follow wherever you feel like. The other thing I was gonna mention before we get started is if you missed yesterday's stream, uh, Christina Gorton and our open source community manager and myself were on the raise.dev Twitch stream. We were talking about accessibility and we started working on a accessibility issue in the Forem codebase. So if you want to check that out, the recording is live. I'm gonna paste that in there. It looks ugly in the chat because I'm pasting Markdown, but you're all hackers, so hopefully you'll figure it out. Yeah, so today what we're gonna talk about is we're gonna talk about the front end architecture, kind of everything front end in Forum. Um, I took some notes, but I do not have a strict agenda, so this is kind of freestyle because I wanted to do it this way because it would help me solidify my own understanding to make sure I don't have holes. Maybe I do. So we're just kind of going it with it that way. High level, we're going to talk about a few things today. And before I get started, I know there are lots of folks that have different levels in terms of the front end. And thank you, Becca, for mentioning that before we went live. Um, the intention here isn't to intimidate you about the Forum code base and all the moving parts in the front end. It's more just to show you what's there. I'm going to be providing links for a lot of things. You can check those things out. What I'd suggest is if you're curious about something or something doesn't make sense to you, feel free to reach out to me on Dev, Twitter, or wherever. Um, Also, if you do end up digging into something, maybe it'll inspire you to write a blog post about something new you learned. Obviously, I'll suggest posting it on Dev, but wherever you blog, go for it. And yeah, so we're just gonna go over the agenda. Just want to say hi to folks in the chat here for a second. Uh, I'm doing the administrative stuff today too, so I might start and stop a bit. But anyways, okay, yeah, so hey Todd, and hello Approx Human. I'm not sure who you are, but hello and thank you for joining the chat. Um, yeah, so we're going to talk about the front end architecture. We're going to talk about testing tools. We're also going to see how far we can get because we have about an hour and 20 minutes, and then we have a hard stop because Bekah has something going on, and I also have a one-on-one after. So we're gonna see how far we get, and if we don't make it through everything, nothing's stopping us from making a second stream about this stuff. So what I'd ideally like to go through today is we're gonna talk about bundling. So that's gonna be Webpack, and also this is Forem, if you aren't aware, is primarily a Ruby on Rails application. So there is the asset pipeline of Ruby on Rails as well that helps build some of the front end assets. We're going to talk about Preact a bit. For those unaware, Forem, even though it is primarily Ruby on Rails, we do have Preact-based components in the application, typically in the logged in user experience, but there's a couple other places we have it too. But this is, to be clear, this is not a single page application. Forum communities are really content driven, so a lot of this is server side cached heavily, and we kind of add the interactions as needed based on certain things, like for example, subscribing to comments on an article. We're going to talk about instant click. That's another little library we use. This is to allow us to load pages quicker, or at least I feel like everything in front end is kind of smoke and mirrors. So it's kind of that. It's still loading at the same speed, but it's prefetching it. We're going to talk briefly about Stimulus, which is a front-end MVC library that is used primarily in the administrative pages, as far as I know. We're going to talk a bit about CSS, Storybook, testing, and maybe something else, but we'll see how far we get. So that was a mouthful. I'm gonna have to take a sip of coffee. I'm once again heavily repping Dev. I've got my Dev coffee mug, and I also have what else do I got? I got my T-shirt. And for those who were on the stream yesterday, I did have a black Dev T-shirt, but I actually own three of them. So yes, I do shower and I do put on new clothes. So just wanted to throw that out there. Uh, Okay, so I think the way we're going to go through this, Becca, is I'm just going to try and explain things to the best of my knowledge. If you happen to have any questions at all during this time, go for it. Don't be shy. People in the chat, same thing. If you're like, what's he talking about? Just feel free. It might take me a minute to see the chat, but that's pretty much how we're going to proceed. So let's go for it. Okay, so I'm just gonna, we're still got the volume on. I'm just gonna switch us to the Be Right Back page for a second to one, show the awesome design that our new designer Emma made, but it's also so I can get set up properly for the Zoom share. You should still be able to hear us though. So I'm just gonna share the screen, Becca. Usually I do VS Code live share, but because I'm gonna be showing stuff in browser too, I think it'll just be easier to share my screen in Zoom. So we'll do that. I'm gonna share my whole desktop, which I don't have anything sketchy on my desktop, so that should be okay. So let's just gonna drag out this. I've got my ghetto chat window. Okay. All right, cool. Okay, and yeah, so let's talk first. Let me get my notes back up. Okay, yeah, so we're going to talk about bundling. Let's switch to the Zoom share browser. And why do we only see myself and not Becca? 1 second. There we go. You're just hiding. So, okay, I'm gonna just shrink this a bit. I'm just adjusting it. I haven't figured this out because I'm not like a streaming pro yet, but uh, there's like when you know the zoom view when you have the people being shown in a little floating video box. I just
Hmm.
had to adjust that while we were going through this stuff. So I if somebody who streams frequently knows how to like make this like seamless so you don't see me doing this like in a clunky kind of way, let me know. But yeah, all right, cool. All right, so this is not what we're talking about, although that is a cool package that we talked about yesterday on the stream. It was Marcy Sutton's No Mouse Days, but okay. So first we're going to talk about bundling. So I'm gonna just pop these links in to the chat and then we'll start talking about them. We'll talk about sprockets briefly, and where are we? Chat. Okay, cool. So here's the links in regards to bundling and front end packaging. Cool. So yeah, so there's a few things, as I mentioned, the Forem code base is primarily a Ruby on Rails code base, and with that, Rails ships with, it's called Sprockets. It's a gem. As far as I know, it's the default for the asset pipeline, and all the asset pipeline means is it'll basically minify and I believe it's really just concatenation of all of the vanilla JavaScript files you have, and then it can also build CSS and it'll also provide the images that you have in your project. But what it does is you'll see, like if I go to dev.to, uh, don't mind that setup not completed. That's a bug we're fixing in production right now. Okay, let's see here. So if I go into the browser tools, let me just zoom in here. There's this file base.js and it's got like a ton of stuff in here. If I go down, there's all these functions, and what you're gonna see is I'm gonna switch us to the other view, which is to just go to VS Code for a sec. Okay, there we go. And I just gotta resize it so we can see Bekah as well. There we go. Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's go to VS Code so you can see this too, Bekah. Yeah, so I was just looking for that function here, init notifications. So you're gonna see, okay, we have it in a couple places, but uh, basically it's in its own file. It's under, I'll zoom in here. Oh no, I'm zoomed in enough, I think. It's in its own file, and there's maybe a few other things in here. But when we were in the web page, you saw that it was all jammed into this base.js file, and that's Sprockets doing this. So it's as far as I know, it's really just concatenating all the files in the order that they're defined, and then it minifies it as well. So if we look for example, the file name init notifications, is it there? No, there's somewhere, maybe initialize page. I'm trying to remember what the file is. Oh, maybe it's just base.html, is that it? Oh, no, base.js. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so let's close a couple things here. Not sure why my lower thing's not closing. Okay. So you're gonna see here this. So just to backpedal a bit, a .erb file is a type of Ruby template. So this will get rendered on the server side. And what you can see in here is there's some JavaScript, which I guess you can inline as well, because when this gets built, it becomes that base.js file that I was showing you there, Bekah. So what it's doing here now is these things here that say require underscore tree. It's literally saying what this means is all the files in the initializers folder, I want to include them, and then so on. So like the required tree for utilities, grab all the utility files, and they're in the order that we've decided. There's also some additional JavaScript that you could put in because this, when it gets rendered in the browser, this is actually a JavaScript file. So this is kind of how Sprockets connects all the front end in terms of vanilla JavaScript stuff. We'll talk about Webpack in a second. Um, but you can see here, like this instant click, it's in this base herb file. So if I come back to the browser for a second, and I look in here, you see how there's instant click in here as well. So it's really putting that all together. Um, this has traditionally been the way that things work in a Rails application. Um, I'm not sure what version. I think it might have been Rails 5 or maybe Rails 4, but they also introduced the option to be able to use Webpack because Webpack's a newer bundling system. Well, it's been around for a while now, but and there's other ones like Parcel and so on. But the Rails framework kind of went all in on Webpack as an option. So in Rails 6, I believe it's the default. So like everything gets built with Webpack. Um, but right now we're still using the sprockets for the library in terms of the asset pipeline. But there's another part of this in the bundling, which is the Webpack part. And the reason why there's a difference is uh, I forget when it was introduced into the project, but it allows you to do the code splitting. Like, have you? I'm assuming you've worked with Webpack, but I don't know, Becca, because I know you work in the React land. So I imagine you've either at least seen Webpack or maybe touched a config. I don't know.
I haven't had to do too much with it.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a bad thing. A lot of people get intimidated by it, and it's a lot of config sometimes. They've improved it over the years, so like everybody's promoting the no config kind of thing, and
Mhm.
there is still some configuration to it, but um, it got introduced into the application, as far as I know, just to provide code splitting so that you're not loading these massive JavaScript bundles. Um, and Preact was also introduced. Let me close the browser tools here for a sec. I'm not sure when Preact was introduced to the project. Ben Halpern, who's the creator of Dev and also he's a co-founder now, he's a big fan of performance, which is not a bad thing at all. um, and at some point, they wanted to add a little more interactivity to the site, and they went for Preact instead of React. For those who aren't aware, Preact is a lighter version of React, but it pretty much has the same API as React. In the latest version, which is the 10 dot version, it also supports stuff like hooks and so on. Because I can't remember, you work, is it primarily React Native you work in, Becca, or is it React or both? Or
Mostly React. I do a little bit of React Native.
okay, yeah, I've never touched React Native. It's on my to-do list, but yeah, so Preact it's a smaller footprint. It's about 3 kilobytes gzipped. The main difference is in React when you have events like on click and so on. React has something called synthetic events. Um, for anyone that's gone through like just browser compatibility and stuff, events were problematic a lot more in the past, but I guess there's still some differences. So what React does is they have this synthetic event which has the same API as a regular browser event, but they handle all the cross-browser issues. Uh, because Preact wanted to be lighter and they're geared more towards all modern browsers, they've just opted to use the regular event system. So, like add event listener, remove event listener. That kind of stuff that you see for people who've used use effect. I'm still kind of new to hooks. Have you done a lot of hooks? I still feel like a noob in hooks.
I've been using hooks for a while, but I haven't gone into some of the more complex stuff that I really want to like dive into and get to know. But it's been
Yeah,
great.
yeah. It's I do find it simplifies things. The I've made like a custom hook, which it seems less complicated than it sounds. Like it sounds scary, but you're just wrapping like a use state or whatever you're using, and then is the use effect that kind of tripped me up a bit still. I mean, I understand. I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but it kind of the way I understood it when I started to use it was it was a replacement for those familiar with React, like component did mount, component will unmount, and component did update. But it's not exactly one to one that it's like uh, I don't know. I read a lot of Ken C. Dawes stuff, and including his new course, and he's saying you kind of got to change your mindset a bit about it. So it's yeah, so it's kind of more just when the state changes as opposed to thinking in life cycle terms. So it's I think I'm doing okay, but I still feel pretty newbie at it. So but always got to keep learning. So
I feel like it's always one of those things that you're uncomfortable with, and then suddenly it just clicks, right? And you're like, oh, how was I
yeah,
not comfortable with that yesterday, right? Like there's this gap, and it just magically works.
yeah, I love that part, and uh, I'm not promoting Kent C. Dodds on purpose. It's just I was listening to the React podcast yesterday while I went out for a nice COVID walk, and he was talking to Chantastic. I half the time I forget people's real names because of Twitter handles, but Michael Chan, who typically is the host of React podcast, and he was just talking about that learning where you're like, "Ugh, I don't get it, I don't get it," and then all of a sudden light bulb, and then it's like but you have to go through those like struggling moments instead of they were talking like if you're reading a book, like maybe say I read a whole book on React, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that was a good read. Okay, I learned a lot. And then you kind of go to sit down to do it, and then you're like, how do I do that again? Whereas if, you know, it sounds silly, but like literally doing the typing and thinking about it and getting those like stuck moments, it really helps solidify it. Um, Went on a bit of tangent there, folks. Sorry, but yeah, so we have Preact in the application, and everything that is Preact based is built with Webpack. So for those, I'm gonna paste those links. Okay, I already pasted them. Cool. Yeah, so the thing is with Webpack, you have this notion of an entry point. So an entry point, for those that have worked on a single page application, you typically have like pretty much an empty index.html file, and this is typical in a create React app, and then it just has an entry point like index.js. So what Webpack does is it goes, that's my entry point, and then from there it's able to build the bundle, and then at that point, uh, we're not going to go into like Webpack configuration, but you can decide how things get split up and so on. And then based on that configuration, Webpack will break things up as it sees fit based on the configuration. But out of the box, it's pretty sensible, the defaults. But all that to say is that's not a big deal when you're outside of Rails, but within Rails, uh, somebody, I don't know if it's the people on the Rails team or not, but there's a project called Webpacker. So what Webpacker is a Ruby gem. I'm going to explain a few things here too, in case people aren't familiar with them. But Ruby gems are essentially, if you're from front end land, think of it as like an npm package. So it's a bundle of code that will get installed in the application, and it runs on the server or during build process, depending on what it is. And So what this does is Webpacker. I'll switch to the web view for sorry, the editor for a second here. Just gotta switch over here. Okay, so you can see my VS Code, Becca?
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm pretty sure I drank too much coffee today. Um, I don't know
Says as
how
he takes
fast
another
I'm
sip.
talking. Yeah, yeah. I don't know how fast I'm talking, but I feel like I must sound like Sonic the Hedgehog or something. Um, yeah, so let's see here. It's environment. Okay. So Webpacker, uh, what it does is it provides a bit of build infrastructure for you to allow you to build Webpack like in the way you would outside of, say, a Rails application. And there's a few conventions you have to do to get that to work. Um, but before we get to that, I'll just show you briefly. So we have some kind of minimal configuration, but this is just showing that you can split up things if you want. This is something, if you're contributing to the Forem code base, you will never have to do this because I did this a while ago. Unless there's some major change to Webpack as a contributor, you would never have to be in here. This is more just to kind of give you a behind the scenes thing. So what happens is if we come here, Webpacker requires that you put these entry points that are from Webpack, which is where it knows to start bundles. They have to be in a folder called packs, in app/javascript/packs. Uh, I believe this is configurable, but we haven't changed anything. Um, so let's just go to one, for example. If I go to, say, searcher, let's see what else we got here. Article page. I'm going to go here because there's a couple things I can talk about after. So this is just a regular JavaScript file. It happens to be .jsx because I I don't know what your preference is, Becca, but I kind of said it that if you have JSX in your code, I like having the .jsx extension. I find visually it helps me kind of find a component better. I mean, there's obviously you can do the Command P in your editor to find stuff, but I just find it helps me distinguish things. Um, so, but for all intents and purposes, a pack file is just a JavaScript file, but it is the starting point for a Webpack bundle. So you can see here, I've got some code. I'm doing some import stuff. So for those familiar with more modern JavaScript, these are just Ecmascript imports, so or ES modules, as people have probably heard. If you're not sure about that, just Google MDM space import and you will be able to start checking all that out. But it's just this piece of JavaScript, and then, well, not just, but um, what happens is this is how we're able to bootstrap a Preact component onto a page. So you can see down here, there's this render block here. So in a component, Preact or React, there's the render, or in function components, it's just the JSX you return. But there's also think of this like if you're in Code Sandbox or Create React App, when you create the initial app component, Becca, it's essentially that. So, but the reason why we have it here and in other files is, like I was mentioning before, it's not a single page application. So this is literally like you have the web page. It's been rendered with the server side with Ruby on Rails, and then there's like little pieces in the page like DOM nodes where you can say this is where I want to bootstrap this Preact component, or over here, or a larger piece. Um, because with the render, when you kind of start up a React application, if we go back to the single page application example, you the examples are typically you're saying I want to render my whole app in a div with like a ID root, and then your whole application just grows in that from that div. in our case, most of the page is static HTML. So we really need to say like, okay, this element here in the page, that's where I want to actually start my Preact application. So it's kind of cool in the sense that you can have these little applications all over the place. This is something you can do with React as well. It's just the single page application fad is it kind of went full tilt a few years. I don't know when it started, but I've done them at other places I've worked at too, and but that's the main difference here. So we're gonna have, like, if I go back to these pack files, you're gonna see, like, if I go to say article form, you're gonna see there's another render and it's a different thing. So it's literally like just think of little pieces on the page where you just get this kind of Preact goodness injected, I guess. Um, and so if we come back to the article page here, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna go over an hour and 20 minutes, so this is definitely gonna be another session. But yeah, so this is the article page.jsx. Now the thing is, this gets injected into a page, and if we come back to the browser, I'm just gonna, you can see my browser, but the folks at home can't yet. Okay, here we go. So I'm gonna go to the article page. So let's just click on what's hot in web development, weekly picks number 148. Okay, so if we come down here, you're gonna see there's this subscribe button, and you're gonna see then it says, I clicked on it, it says you've been subscribed. I can unsubscribe, I can subscribe to specific comments. This whole page is, I think, aside from the search, everything is just static HTML except this here. That's a Preact component. So just to kind of, whoops, I do that all the time. I press Command P and it's doing it again. So 12, Command P. So I'm going to look for that article page.jsx. So this is literally what we saw when we were in my VS Code editor a second ago. And you're going to see, I'm going to, just to show it a little more clearly, I'm going to subscribe here again. Okay, maybe something's happening because I'm in the dev tools. I don't know what's going on. Here, let me just subscribe. Oh, I am subscribed. Sorry. Okay. No, it isn't. There we go. I clicked it too fast. Okay. So there's this comment subscription here. I'm going to put a breakpoint. For those who might be just starting their dev journey, I strongly suggest looking into getting to know your developer tools really well. In Chrome, Firefox, or any other browser, there is typically developer tools. Here, I'm putting in what's called a breakpoint, and it's going to stop the code right here before it runs. So what I want to show here is you can see that it says unsubscribe right now, and I've got the little cog there. I'm going to reload the page. Okay, you see how it says subscribe right now? That's because most of the page is static HTML, like I was mentioning. So that subscribe button there is server-side rendered. And then what happens is Preact is going to render in that the parent of that element, and it's going to basically take over all the HTML that was in there. So if you see this run here, oops, I don't want to be in weird code. Okay, I'm not sure why it's going in there, but if I go to the comment subscription file, we'll come there just to see. Let's go to render. So if I'm coming from here, I'm gonna let it run. Oh, I gotta rerun it again. Let's do that again. So you see here it says subscribe right now, and then I come here, it's still subscribed, and then the comment subscription component, which is what's gonna be in there, it's gonna run and it's gonna replace itself with, you can see here, here's a cog icon, and then it's gonna change the state to whatever it is. In our case, it's gonna be subscribed. So this kind of ties into there's server-side rendering of React applications. I don't know if you've heard about that at all, Becca, or not. I've never done any myself in terms of server-side rendering React, um, but the idea is you're able to build your React component on the server side so that all the HTML that's required for that particular state shows up. And then once you get onto the client side, once the page is loaded, React knows based on, I think, checks an ID or something. I don't remember how the hydration works, but then it kind of bootstraps with the JavaScript part, and it already has the proper state. In our case, it's a Ruby on Rails app, so we don't have that. There is a package that allows you to do that, but we're not using it at the moment, and I'm not positive if it's supported by Preact or not. I spoke to Jason Miller, who's the creator of Preact, and sorry, somebody's saying hello in the chat. Um, yeah, I spoke to him and he said it's doable. I think he said he's done it somewhere else in a Rails app. Um, but there's still, I brought it up, but we haven't, I don't think we're planning on going that direction. So basically, it's running server side on in the Rails app, generating the HTML, and then we just bootstrap on the client side. So it's kind of a smoke and mirrors thing, but it's kind of neat because you get the page loaded fast, and then all of a sudden it updates the state because the Preact component runs. And you can see if I look in
Can I
here,
pause for a second and ask a question?
yeah, go nuts. I feel like I'm rambling.
No, no, it's fine. I know when I was first learning to code, the words like server side and client side were really confusing to me for a while. Can you maybe give a short
Yep.
definition of what those things are?
Yeah, so not back in the day, but like still today, uh, forget like client-side frameworks like React, Angular, Vue, whatever. If you just want a web page to load from a website, so think of a static site on, say, Netlify, or just like you literally create, even on your local machine, you just create an index.html file and you grab some package to start a web server, and then your HTML file might say hello world, and then you go to the website and then you see hello world. That's the server side rendering. So some kind of backend or with a web server will generate the markup that you need to see on a web page. And that's how most websites work. There's another conversation about Jamstack, which is a whole other thing, but you still, even with Jamstack, you still need a server-side rendered page to at least start. So that's what server-side is. You're getting HTML, images, potentially references to JavaScript that gets generated on the server, and then your web browser knows to grab it's called a request, a web request, and then that brings down literally text, which is the web page you're going to see, and then the web browser knows how to render, for example, a button in markup. It's going to show up as a button. Oh, it has some CSS or a style class. It'll apply that class, and that's how you'll see those things. Thanks for interjecting there because it is a good point. Um, and on the other side, there's the client side. So you have a page that's loaded. Maybe there's no interactivity. It's just like a page that says hello world. But say you want a button that we'll go with the classic to-do list app, which is what pretty much everybody seems to point to at some point. And if you want to click on it, there's two things. If we're talking about server side still, you can still click on a button and you can say go back to the server, and then like if you have a form on the page, like I don't know, save my to-do item, it'll get sent back to the server, and then the server will have some kind of backend, so think Java, .NET, Node.js, maybe Rails. it'll go, oh, somebody sent me a to-do item. I'm gonna save it into a database maybe, and then it's gonna come back, and then it's gonna say I need to load the page again, and this is the markup, the HTML that I need to send for the page to load again. And that can all work without JavaScript. Like, so there's that. But then there's the whole JavaScript part, which allows to so JavaScript typically refers to client-side scripting. There is Node.js as well, which is JavaScript, but we're talking in the context of client-side, which means what you see in the browser. So that could be like when I click a button, I show an alert, for example. It could be animations running with JavaScript through like Christina, my coworker, she's big into green sock animation. So that's all JavaScript, but that's interactivity that you'll see on the page, and that's all done through JavaScript. You can definitely, you know, I'm definitely not detracting from CSS here. There's a ton of things you can do with just CSS. But yeah, that's what the client side is. It's really JavaScript giving you some additional interaction, and it can really be whatever you want it to be. It could, I won't go into it too much, but like for example, a Jamstack site or even a page like this, I can still make a request to with JavaScript, like they're called AJAX requests. Um, which asynchronous, it stands for asynchronous JavaScript in XML, but nobody uses XML anymore. But anyways, so you can still say like I click on a button, save something to the database, and it's still going to the server, but you're not doing what's, like a traditional, like you click on it, the page refreshes, it gets some updates, and then it comes back and loads with the new. So I feel like I butchered those explanations a bit, but does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think that, it can be confusing because there's some things that are overlapping, right? And so that's what makes it
Yeah,
difficult to kind of figure out like where is the line drawn, but it's good
yeah,
explanation, I think.
no, for sure. And like you're saying, a lot of these things are intermingled too. So, you know, it, and that's kind of why we're going through these things. And I definitely encourage you to read up more on some of the links I'm pasting. If you have questions, you can hit me up, hit up Becca, whoever, if you have a mentor or join the virtual coffee. Um, but yeah, so that's uh, we keep going on
Sorry,
tangents,
I
but that's okay.
derailed you.
No, 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 no. It happens all the time. It's all good. And please stop me if you're like I want to ask a question because yeah. So in a nutshell, Webpack allows us to bundle a portion of the front end in a forum, and then we also have sprockets. Uh, we're trying to get more stuff into the Webpack side of things, but for now, just for some legacy reasons, it's also big refactors. It's not high priority, and things are working. So just because you can have shiny new things doesn't mean it's a good idea to necessarily upgrade everything. That's a little knowledge nugget I'm dropping today. Okay, let's go back to my notes here. So okay, we kind of talked about Preact with Webpack there a bit. There's also the instant click that I mentioned at the beginning there. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the way the library works is anytime you hover over a link in the Forem code base, it's going to start to prefetch the page, and that gives the appearance of a faster loading experience. It's still the same speed. It's just it's doing it in advance for you. So that's why, like, say I hover over write a post, it's instant. If I, you know, like people have a lot of people have said that dev is really snappy, and that's one of the reasons that contributes to it. We also have a lot. We heavily cache on the server side as well because as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of the site is really content. It's not, you know, it's not like some crazy, not crazy, but it's not like some wild snowboarding site where it's like videos and all that. It's really like, here's a blog post, give it a read. So most things are cache server side, and we also do things like the instant click in the front end to just help with the whole performance, or at least the appearance of good performance. Um, Okay, I'll touch on it briefly, only because I haven't worked with it too much, or actually, I shouldn't say too much, I'd say not at all. Um, Stimulus.js is another front-end library. It, I, I'm not a Rails dev really. I'm still kind of a noob at it, so I'm learning as I go because I end up touching things when I work in the front end in Ruby land too. But Stimulus, it seems to pair well with Rails, and it's a little MVC front end library. So MVC is it's a pattern, a programming pattern. It stands for Model View Controller. We can talk about it briefly in case people aren't familiar. But you think of your model, it's just a way to separate things to make it more testable and just easier to maintain. So you'd have the model, which is typically something coming from the database, but so think of like a user. Uh, it also includes business logic. So think of, say, validating a user's email or the length of, I'm not gonna say names because like validation of names is horrible on the internet. Some people have a name with two letters and it's never considered valid on some sites. But um, so the model is business logic and the data that you want to persist, say in a database or wherever you store it. And it's also what you use as information when you want to show something on a web page. So the view is what you see. So think of a web page or a portion of a web page, and the information it has is the model. So that would be like, say, the user. So it would show Nick Taylor, my username Nicky T online on a page. So like, for example, if we just come here to like my profile, so this information gets loaded from, there's a user model in the back end, and that's how it pulls all my information. Um, the thing in between is called a controller, and I kind of like to think of this as somebody directing traffic, kind of. So you have, for example, uh, if we're saying, you know, I wanna show the user profile. Okay, so on a page, you're gonna click a button to say go to the user profile. There's going to be some kind of web request. We won't go into web requests too much because there's like, we could spiral into many different things, but it'll go through this controller and it'll say like, okay, I want to get the user information. So then the controller goes, okay, the view asks me to go get a user. So then the controller goes, okay, I'm gonna go get the user model. So think of it like the person in between that navigates back and forth between the model and the view. That's kind of the high level. If you're interested in learning more, I'm gonna just paste in the chat MVC, and then uh, I don't know if Wikipedia is the best in terms of giving clarity on this. If people have other suggestions, please pop them in the chat. I'm just gonna pop one in here. Okay, cool. So that's another library that we use in the admin section. I haven't I haven't worked in the admin section that much, but and I'm not sure why it was decided to go with that. I think it's because it pairs with Rails. Uh, some people might think it's a little weird that we have Preact and another, but there's nothing stopping you from having different frameworks. Like I've even had a friend who's worked on an app that had Angular and React in it for weird reasons, but there's nothing stopping you from doing that. I'm not saying just because you have the power to do it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing
You have the
to
choice to
give some
start, I
people.
think.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think in that case it was something weird, like there was the new app and that was going to be in React, and then there was
Yeah.
an iframe that was still Angular or something like that. So but you can do it, but it's up to you if you want to make a Frankenstein, I guess. um, yeah, so the admin pages use that, and I I'll paste that link in the chat too. Sorry for the awkward pause. It's I'm managing both things here. So okay, all right. Let's talk CSS briefly. Um, so Forem and Dev, we use Sass primarily. I don't know if what do you use for CSS, Becca? Do you use vanilla CSS, or do you use something like Sass or less, or
I've done both.
CSS and
Yeah.
JS?
And
Okay.
mhm.
Yeah. No, I've used CSS and JS. I've used another one called CSS modules, and I've used vanilla CSS and Sass, and I don't know. Not knocking the CSS and JS. I think it works well, like from like a developer standpoint, because you can kind of, it's just kind of all there. But the thing I've noticed, especially since working on Forum, is it's not a single page application, and the other thing is, or even the last place I worked at, we we couldn't use CSS and CSS and JS really, because there was still legacy stuff that was using, CSS or Sass. So then all those styles that were jammed into the CSS and JS, you can't use them if you're like, because the application I was working on was another Rails application, but there was legacy code that was using a really old version of another library called Sencha. So it's not React. So there's no connect in between them. So it'd kind of be like doing double the work if you had it in CSS and JS, or and in the regular CSS. So um, yeah, I don't know. I've kind of found like I'm totally fine with just regular CSS. I mean, I do like Sass, but yeah, I feel like for me the good combo to be able to use it in as many places as possible is at the end of the day just plain CSS. But
Yeah, I think
yeah,
it, I don't know.
so that
I feel like it simplifies things, at least for me, when I'm moving on a project.
yeah, no, for sure. Um, and then the only other thing I was going to mention about CSS that we use is we don't use Tailwind. And for those who don't know what Tailwind is, I'll paste that in the chat too. But Tailwind CSS is a utility class-based uh, CSS framework, I guess. I don't know if framework's the best term. Yeah, it is framework. Google told me it was.
Yes.
I'm just going to paste that in there. All right. Yes, that's right. Collab TV, CSS, pure CSS is beautiful. Sorry, just responding to some people in the chat. Yeah, so we don't use Tailwind, but one of our product designers, we ended up going with utility-based classes, but they're bespoke, so they're homegrown ones. I can't remember the exact reason why we went with homegrown versus something like Tailwind. I think it was more to not bring in the whole kitchen sink, but I haven't really worked with Tailwind, but I do know you can configure it to pull certain things in that you want. So, um, but yeah, so we use that along with typically BEM style CSS. So BEM, for those who aren't aware, is a naming convention in CSS. So it stands for Block Element Modifier. I'm gonna paste that in there too. I know some people might already be familiar with this stuff, but to reach the widest audience, because there's people of all levels here, I just want everybody to be in the know. So we use that, and to to be honest, the CSS isn't a mess in Forum. I shouldn't even suggested it was, but it's been the application has existed for like the initial site that was created. It's been like 4 years that it's been around. Many people, because it's an open source project, have contributed to it. Um, at one point, we weren't really standardized on anything, and I think it's only really been because I started in January, and then our product designers started a little before me, I think, and then so then we kind of sat down and we were just trying to clean things up and stuff. So uh, for there's another thing in CSS that you can use, which is the exclamation important uh, property in the CSS, and we do have it in our code base. It's something that you typically frown upon because you want to embrace the CSS cascade, and I will put that link in too. Um, but the thing is, because it's it's not it's definitely I'm not saying this to point fingers or anything because so many people have contributed to the code base, but at some points when people were trying to ship something, because at the end of the day, remember shipping something is important, there's a balance in that, um, but in some cases, like, oh, the style's not working and somebody couldn't figure it out, so they put an important on it, and that kind of happens a few times, and um, we've been trying to remove them whenever possible. Uh, you'll notice if we get to showing some of Storybook after the the CSS classes, the utility classes, a lot of them have an important on it because of the legacy CSS. It's not because we're just like nuke everything. It's to accommodate living with the legacy CSS still. And it's kind of like an ongoing to do when we'll be able to remove them, we definitely will. Uh,
Yeah, it's
so
always that
that's
awkward transition and making sure that it continues to do what it needs to be doing, with
yeah.
the goal of updating when you can.
Yeah, because the thing with CSS, well, with anything, if you don't properly maintain something to fix these things, it's not like for example, right now I couldn't go into the code base and say I'm going to remove all the importance because there would be so many things visually that would break probably, and like finding these things because the code base is quite large now, it would take a while. So it's kind of like a ongoing work in progress. Maybe we'll never get there. Maybe we'll make a dent in it, but I'm not losing sleep over it. But it's all to say, you know, it, when people say like CSS is easy or whatever, it's like anything else. It can get complicated, and you still have to maintain it like a code base. So yeah.
Now,
Okay.
working on
Uh,
updating those importance, is that an issue that somebody could work on if they wanted to work on Forum?
I'm gonna take a note of it because I'm not positive if we have an explicit like remove all importance from
Yeah.
the code base, but no, it's a good point. I'm gonna take a look at that. Look at important issue
Or maybe they can raise an
because
issue like, hey, I know how
yeah,
I could deal with this.
yeah, because that would definitely be kind of some quick wins during Hacktoberfest because it is Hacktoberfest for those. I'm assuming most people know it's Hacktoberfest, but it is Hacktoberfest if you weren't aware. Check out hacktoberfest.com. Um, but yeah, I think it would be a good issue, and because it's the kind of thing you can't do like I'm gonna remove 20 importance. It'd be like
Yeah.
maybe I'll remove one or two, see where all that's referenced, make sure everything's still good, and then that it's kind of like with Z indexes too. There's a lot of Z indexes that I'm thinking we probably don't need, but that's another kind of ongoing work kind of thing. So I don't know if the proper term is Z index hell, but yeah. So um, next we're gonna talk about Storybook. So I'm just gonna go to forum.storybook.com. Uh, and I'm just gonna load up storybook.js. I'm gonna paste all these links in the chat. Just give me 2 seconds. I also gave a talk on Storybook. It's a little older. It's like from 3 years ago, so a lot of things have changed in Storybook. but I'm gonna paste it in anyways because the concepts are, it's still the same kind of concepts. So we'll go to Storybook JS. So I encourage you to give a read here. They have a lot of great documentation. I'll give the high level of what Storybook gives you though. So say you're working on a design system. So design system is like common components that you use throughout your products, and uh, Storybook allows you to build these things in isolation. So you don't need to be running your whole application just to say, I want to design a button. It gives you this, okay, Forem Storybook's running slow. Maybe it's deploying. Let's try. Should still be up, but if not, I'll spin up the local one. Oops, that's not it. Storybook. Okay. All right, I'm gonna load it up locally. Oh no, there we go. I think it might have just been deploying or something. So uh, I'll preface this with uh, most of the stuff in here is stuff I've done. One of my product designer Pavel's helped me a bit too, but there's still a lot of work to be done in here. Uh, for example, Exhibit A, this is me with just emojis because our design system is called crayons, but that doesn't really look that nice, so I made a request to get us a nice logo in there. But if you remember, if we come back here just to really give the full visual of what Storybook gives you, if I come back to the article here, we see I have this. Okay, I picked the longest article on the planet. Just 1 second. Okay. Okay, it really is super long. Okay, so the component down here, the subscribe and all these different changes here, that's a Preact component like I mentioned before. If we come back into Storybook and I look for comment, you can come to the comment subscription component, and you can see that's the same button that you see right here. I'm a big fan of the pink theme, so that's why it looks different, but and I think something's broken. Yeah, there's something broken with the theme switcher here at the moment. I'll have to look into that. That's probably a good Hacktoberfest issue, actually. Give me 2 seconds to write that down. Broken theme switcher in Storybook. Okay, cool. So what Storybook gives you is you're able to build out that component kind of like on this canvas, and you're doing the same thing, like you're writing your JSX, you're doing all the functionality that your component eventually does. So like if I click on this in here, it actually works. I can see unsubscribe. I can show the menu here. I gotta shrink this a bit because, but you see it can flip. So it's literally the the actual component with all its functionality in here. The only things that aren't in here is like if I click subscribe, it's not going to the server to say save the subscription for these comments. The other thing that Storybook gives you is you can see it in different views. So I've changed the state of this one, but if I come back to subscribed, you can see that all of a sudden I'm rendering it in the state when it's subscribed. The first one, like I showed you before I started clicking on it, it's unsubscribed. Here, it's subscribed with a comment type other than the default, so it's selected post author comments by default. And Storybook also comes with some neat add-ons. So there's a thing called knob here. So I don't know if knobs is the best, because I don't know if everybody would really understand the reference these days, but I think it's related to like knobs on like some kind of controller or like a radio, like you're changing the station, you're turning knobs, like that's what it is. So here, for example, you can see the subscription type is currently author, and that's what's selected here. It says post author comments. But I can come here and I can say I want to change it to not subscribed. And then, so you're in Storybook and you're testing all the states So it's kind of really handy. I'm gonna go like, oh, I want to make sure it's subscribed to top comments, and then I see top selected. There's like you can make your own add-ons. There's other things. So like there's an actions panel. So when I click on things, uh, what did I do here? If I click done, you see instead of going to the real server, I can just kind of fake like when I'm click, something happens, just to show that the functionality is there. I added an accessibility add-on so it can tell you if there's anything in terms of violations. This is not foolproof, obviously, but yeah, that's right, Ray Chris. Yeah, Ray Chris. Sorry, just responding in the chat here. I'm still getting used to doing the back and forth here.
It's really hard.
It's like literal context switching.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because I've done
uh,
Storybook and I never thought of why it was called knobs, right? Until you said that.
yeah, but it's kind of going on a tangent here again. But if you think of like a save icon, it shows a little disc. Like discs,
Yeah.
like 3.5-inch discs don't exist anymore. I mean, you can probably buy some and maybe use them, but you know, the next generation is going to be like, I don't understand what that is, or
Yeah,
maybe it'll
no.
just get ingrained.
I think my
Um,
kids found some laying around the house from my college years and they're like, what is this thing? Like, I couldn't
yeah,
even
yeah.
put it in
I,
something to show them.
Yeah, I guess nowadays they're good for coasters. I even have. Did you ever have zip disks as well? They're
I
they're
don't
like
think
they
so.
were like they came out in the 90s from a company called iOmega, and they're a little fatter, but I think the original ones held 17 megabytes, and when I was in school, it was like amazing. Which 17 megabytes is nothing now. That's like three MP3s maybe. But yeah. Uh, Yeah, sorry, the chat. I'll get back to the chat in a bit. But all that to say is think of Storybook is really like this is a literal canvas where you have a clean slate and you can build out your things. And I can definitely say it's allowed me to build out things a lot quicker. And one of the things is when you're in an application and you're building something, you have the ability to leak out of your component, like, oh yeah, I'm just
Mhm.
gonna pull this thing in. When you're in Storybook, it's like there's nothing you can have access to. So in the case of like a React component or a Preact component, and Storybook supports several platform libraries like Vue, plain HTML, Angular as well. But so in the case of a Preact component, all you really have is component state and props. That's it. So I like that aspect of building in Storybook as well because it really forces you to think of the component itself. Uh, and when you're outside of Storybook building something, you not saying you would, but you could have potential tendency to say, ah, yeah, I'm gonna grab this global thing because it makes it easier or whatever. So I find that another cool aspect of it. There's a huge ecosystem of add-ons. Like I've only shown you a few here. Um, like there's some notes here. That one doesn't have it, but if I go to like a button, for example, so if I come to our buttons icon, I can have some notes about what the button does and so on. And this is kind of where we have to do some reworks. Speaking with our product designer Lisa, just to make this a little more approachable because for people working in the Forem front end, uh, I don't even know if everybody knows about this still. Like I've blogged about it a few times, but I think we should. I think a good PR would actually be to link it in the front end documentation to just say like,
I was just,
check out Storybook because
yeah. I was thinking too, like one of the things I like about Storybook is when you're working with a team of people, or even, if you're working on an open source project where you have people coming in and out, it's nice to have this as a reference point.
oh yeah, for sure. No, big time. And I mean, our project's open source, but regardless, like I can see this being a good onboarding utility.
For sure.
Like, okay, I need you to, you know, build out a button that deletes. It's a destructive action, so it's a delete. So I come here, and then okay, let me see. Okay, danger. So then all of a sudden I have a red button. This is stuff we're going to be reworking a bit, but yeah, you can literally like if somebody says I need a button with variant danger, you can come here and then you can just pull it out. There's other cool add-ons. I know we're not going to get to everything else. We don't have too much to talk about after. It was really just testing, but that could probably be its own thing. Um, yeah, we got about 8 minutes here, so yeah, I guess we'll probably just finish off with Storybook, I think. Um, there's so many add-ons, like I was saying, and there's even some uh, at the time when I put this up, because I added Storybook to the project like 3 years ago, but nobody really used it except me. So it's only been like what you see now is really I kind of nuked what was there, and this is pretty much what you see in here is what's been in there since January 2020. So, um, but there's so many add-ons, and there's a couple good ones. There's one where you can actually say, I want to get the JSX for like a danger button, for example. So the prop will get populated properly and so on. And then you can just copy it, and then you can go paste it in your code. At the time when I tried to use it, we were on an older version of Preact and it wasn't compatible. So I got to look into stuff like that. But uh, there's still work to do in here. Like I said, I ideally want this to be like just a great resource for anything component in the front end that people can just come in, instantly know, okay, that's what that is. This is when I should use it. The documentation is a little sparse right now, so there's some work that needs to be done in there. Um, the only other thing I'll mention in here, and so this is our design system. So like these are like the building blocks of components we build in there. But if we come back to say, where was I? Application components, like that article form. So we basically have that and that. Why don't I see it? Oh, it's because I'm filtering. Sorry. Okay, so we have our components, which are the main design component, design system components, but then we also have application components. So you can see, for example, here's the article loading when, like if you've ever been on the front page when you're logged in, if for whatever reason there's a slow connection, you'll see this. Then it's changing it based on if it's the featured article. And then here's the comment subscription. So it's not just for building out the design system. You can also build out portions of the application in here too. So yeah, so there's that. And then I know you got to head out soon, so I'll just kind of wrap up with one thing that
It's
wasn't
all right.
surfaced one thing that wasn't surfaced at all, including like internally within the team, like my awesome coworker Vida, he had a PR up a few months ago, and she was doing something in the front end, and I suggested, oh, why don't you use one of our utility classes? And she's like, oh, is there documentation about that? And I was like, oh, not really and stuff. So she didn't end up really using it at that point. And then it's about a month and a half ago, I think, I added this. So all these utility classes, they're generated in Sass with objects and arrays. So it's not something I could really manually write documentation for. So I had to ended up automating this. So if you look at all of these, they all have the same format, and you can see there's the import in there. I even have that note. It's used to override pre-designed system CSS. Um, uh, so now we have the utility classes in here surfaced as well. So if somebody needs to look up something, so they can come here and then they can go, I need to do a background utility CSS class, and then all of a sudden they can come in here, and there's still there's still stuff that people might be like, what's BG base 100? You know, uh, even they're variants of colors and stuff, but there's just a lot of stuff that I think we can improve in here still. So I think after the stream today, I'm gonna throw out a few issues there that could be good for Hacktoberfest. And I think we're gonna stop there, Becca, just because there is testing that I do want to talk about, but I think that could probably talked about for even an hour on its own. So
Yeah, I like
um,
testing.
I, I appreciate you listening to my ramblings. um, yeah, so for folks on the stream and people that check this out later, check out all the links. They'll be in the chat still, but the Twitch stream will disappear after 2 weeks. It'll be posted on YouTube and probably on Dev. But I'm gonna get a blog post up, which is just mentioning the stream, and I'm gonna paste in all the links that I've been pasting into the chat here. Let's see what else. I think that's pretty much it. I'm just gonna paste in two more, and then we'll wrap things up, Bekah. Yeah. So there's this one. There's one which is a link to the forum documentation, and there's also, this is the last post I wrote on the front end. I put this in the chat. Uh, this talks about the upgrade we did to Preact. We migrated to Kent C. Dodd's testing library. We're using Preact testing library, not React, because we are Preact. Talks a bit about accessibility testing in here as well, for those who want to check that out. I am definitely not an accessibility expert, but I'm doing my best to just, get better and better at it every day, and adding in tooling and stuff. We have linters and we have tests as well now that don't necessarily cover everything, but it's a start. And we have browser extension tools like we talked about yesterday, the WebAIM Wave Chrome extension or browser extension, and there's also the Axe extension. So that's pretty much, I think, where we'll stop today. I just wanted to thank you for coming on to the stream, Bekah. I know it was like super last minute, but I really do appreciate it. It was
Oh,
great,
thanks for
always
having
great
me.
chatting with you. And like I said at the beginning there, feel free to give myself a follow on Twitch, Dev, Twitter, wherever. You can also give Bekah a follow on Dev and Twitter, and I'm just going to paste those links in again for people who are just showing up. And I think that's it. We're going to say bye for now. Just let me pop these in the chat, and boom. All right. So we are done, folks. I will see you. Is today Wednesday? Yes, it is. I'll see you tomorrow. We have a live pairing stream tomorrow with Elliot Sanford, one of our community
Nice.
members. So tune in for that at 1 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. UTC. Take care, everybody.